Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. On this week's episode, I interviewed Pierre Rochard. Pierre is a Bitcoiner that's been in the space since 2013. He started off as an accountant, moved his way into, building, and then he also is part of the Nakamoto Institute. He's just a wealth of knowledge in the Bitcoin space and has great theories, and it was a great conversation. So we get into, time chain, we get into, big theories behind Bitcoin and where things are going. And I think you guys will love this conversation because we really, it was a good one. I definitely want to do it again. We also talked about a lot of Austrian economics. I know a lot of people are into Austrian economics, but we don't really talk about it too much. So I asked him some questions about it because he is really that's what started him down his Bitcoin journey. So, anyways, hope you guys enjoy this episode. Thanks as always to our sponsor, the BitBox02 hardware wallet. Go to shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin made simple to get 5% off using your promo code Bitcoin made simple and get yourself a hardware wallet because I don't know if you've noticed, but exchanges are going insolvent. They're losing your Bitcoin keys. So please, please, please take your keys into your own hands with a BitBox02 hardware wallet. It's the Bitcoin only version, and you can take care of your keys and protect your wealth. Also, Movies Plus, go to mymoviesplus.com or download the app in any of the app stores. And we really, really need your support because we're about to come up against a big, big fight here. We're good things, all good things. And we have some good announcements coming out very soon. But yeah, just hold on to your butts. And yeah, you can get 1 year for $20 using the promo code SWAN, thanks to our partners at Swan Bitcoin. And then also Upstream Data. Upstream is Steve Barber's company. They sell Bitcoin miners. They sell hash huts if you're looking on the industrial scale, but they also have the black box if you're looking to do something on the quiet side on the lower scale. So I will be getting a black box and I will be telling you guys all about it. But go to upstreamdata.ca to check out more about them. If you want to get in touch with me, go to Twitter, I am Cory_Tusick, and you can email the show Bitcoin Made Simple Podcast at gmail.com. Thanks. Mentioned you have a couple little ones, and I don't dox, so I don't want to dox information. I'm very, cautious about that, but I have to ask you a parenting question. And by the way, everyone that's listening up, I apologize. For some reason, my mic isn't working. So my audio is going to be garbage, but Pierre has his mic and it's working, so that'll be good. But Pierre, what was harder for you, going from 0 to 1 child or 1 to 2?
Definitely 0 to 1. And 1 to 2 brought its own challenges as well. But I think that in either case, the tremendous blessings far outweigh any kind of the difficulties.
Oh yeah, no, that's what like if I ever complain about something about parenting, first of all, I try to never do it in front of my kids, but like it's never like, oh, parenting is bad, it's just like it's a challenge in and of itself, but it is such a blessing. But yeah, I don't know. I found that going from 1 to 2 for us just absolutely kicked our butts. Like it was like with one, like if my wife had him, then we are like, oh, okay, like she's good, like they're good. I can do whatever I want. And then once we had two, I was like, it was like having like two footballs. Like, what do we do? What do we do? Like,
Yeah.
um, my brother says going from 2 to 3 is a whole new ball game because you go from man to man coverage to zone defense, and um,
Yeah, I'm one of three brothers, so I'm the middle child. So I can only imagine how challenging it was right there.
especially boys and all that. We girls have their own challenges, but yeah, boys can be, let's just say, a little messy.
Yeah.
Um, but so I just wanted to give everybody, I'm sure a lot of people listening have, pretty familiar with your background, but just like give a quick background of your origins into Bitcoin and how you got there so that, people that may not know have an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thread really starts in summer of 2005. I was in high school and I was on Wikipedia and I stumbled onto a Wikipedia article about Anarcho-Capitalism, which is this kind of anarchist ideology of, hey, the free market could do everything. We don't need governments at all. And I found that to be fascinating. So I went down that rabbit hole. I ended up on a website called Mises.org, which teaches about Austrian economics, and started reading about what their point of view was on the economy. And already I was somewhat interested in economics at that point, and they had a really interesting view on what causes the business cycle. Why does the economy have these booms and busts? And they really pointed to the money as being the central problem that was causing this, which really it goes against a lot of what mainstream economics teaches, which is that um, they'll point to human psychology of like, oh, okay, people are just irrational, and so that's why you get business cycles. Or they'll point to technology cycles, right? Of, oh, you have these massive technological breakthroughs, and then that causes economic disruption. So the Austrians, there's different schools of thought within Austrian economics, but the one that I found to be the most persuasive was that um, you have a combination of fractional reserve banking, so the banking system creating more money, and then combine that with the fiat system of central banks that remove any limits to fractional reserve banking, and so now we have zero reserve banking, and that is the impetus, the central reason why we have business cycles in the economy. Um, Once I started reading about this stuff, I just couldn't stop. So I went down the rabbit hole, and um, that led me to then in college majoring in accounting, because the Austrians have a tremendous amount of respect for accounting and economic calculation and profit and loss system, and I found that to be more interesting to me than finance, because if you study finance in college, it is basically you're studying fiat, right? It's like it's not that you're studying sound money or sound finance or good finance. You're just studying, here's the existing system that you will be an entry level cog in when after you graduate, and you just have to like accept that it's all phony baloney. Whereas in accounting, it's much more grounded. I found to be grounded in economic reality. Um, so started my career there. Now, when I was my last year in grad school to get my master's in accounting, that's when I really went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Um, I had joined the Mises Circle, which was a reading group at UT Austin, started by Michael Goldstein and Daniel Krawiss. And um, we started debating 100% reserve banking versus fractional reserve banking. And at some point, Bitcoin came up of, well, Bitcoin, this system is actually 100% reserve banking. Um, and that there's only 21 million Bitcoin. And that got my attention because even before Bitcoin existed, I had daydreamed that something better than gold would be if there was no supply increase at all. Because gold has approximately like 2% increase in supply every year. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if hypothetically there was some kind of money that didn't even have that increase? And so when I started learning about Bitcoin's kind of monetary policy, it became obvious to me that the Bitcoin was going to continue to grow. And this was like 2012, 2013. And then in 2013, there was that bull market, and it felt like immediate gratification of like, hey, I predicted this would grow, and here it is growing very quickly. So obviously, I'm a genius. And that's what drew me into Bitcoin and just learning and writing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, the bull market makes everybody feel like a genius. And and I actually not to show my own article, I mean it's in Bitcoin magazine, so I don't, make any money from it or anything, but I wrote an article because my I came in right at the crash of 2020 and enjoyed just a meteoric rise where I was like, I am so smart. like I knew all this was going to happen. And I like quoted in there, like, I was like, Elon joined and he was even behind me. Like, I'm so smart, this guy's sending rockets into space. Like, and and then Bitcoin humbles you. So you lived through that. When, let's see, if you came in 2013, I guess you had to have a bubble. It probably burst, but and we don't have to get it too like into the Bitcoin price history. But actually, before we get into that, I want to ask more about Austrian economics because I'm very fascinated by it, and I feel like it's something that's not talked about a lot. I think I think the phrase Austrian economics is used a lot, but not a lot of people actually talk about it. So this is one of the things I was like, okay, I'm gonna drill down with Pierre because you've focused a lot on it. Um, so Austrian economics, if am I giving a correct flyby view of it that like it's basically the opposite of fractional reserve banking, and basically what Bitcoin is the monetary system that would be most suited for Austrian economics?
So the Austrian economics, the school of Austrian economics has tremendous diversity in it, and so there are Austrian economists who are for fractional reserve banking, and so it's not homogenous. Now, I would say they're probably in the minority among Austrian economists, um, and that the majority are lean towards 100% reserve banking as kind of being the way to prevent the business cycle. But there's a very healthy, active debate within Austrian economics on that point. In my mind, what distinguishes Austrian economics from any other school of thought in economics is really rooted in philosophy. So Kant has um, this idea of having synthetic a priori propositions. And so just to put that into like normal human speak, the idea there is that you can come up with um, theories about the world that are not rooted in empirical observation, in gathering data to validate a hypothesis, but rather are rooted in logic. And that it's the probably the easiest example is math, right? That if you look at pure math theory, it's not based on measuring a triangle and kind of taking that approach. It really is based on pure logic. And so the Austrians have of the view that economics is actually closer to pure math theory than it is to physics, for example, where physics tends to be far more empirically grounded than that. So, and maybe physics is a bad example. Maybe history is actually the diametric opposite, right? History is
Yeah.
like pure empirical observation. So this contrasted to their competitors when Austrian economics was starting, and the reason it's called Austrian economics is that it really started in earnest in Austria, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 19th century. Their competitors in Germany were the historicists. And so they were like 100% like, oh, economics is just, it's basically history. It's just economic history, right? And what specifically, like what the axioms that they go down are what's called praxeology. Praxeology is the study of human action. So praxis is Greek for action, ology is the study of. And so praxeology is saying, okay, if we can come up with some central axioms for what humans do, then we can build up some economic theory. And it really centers on what ends people have, right? So people, when they act towards certain ends, and then the means by which they achieve those ends. And so that's really from there you can develop whole economic theories about capital structure and money and all this. But it's rooted in looking at logically how do humans do things rather than trying to find like historical examples of what happened in the economy.
Hmm. Yeah, and I look at it as like numbers don't lie. You know what I mean? Like whenever you're, like I own businesses, so like whenever you're putting together your profit and loss statement, like you can't like get around it. Like it is what it is. Like they're all laying out there. So, um, what do you think? I mean, I'm trying to understand that Austrian economics as much as I can, without like letting it dominate my entire life and completely forgetting that I'm running businesses. Um, uh, but I feel like it's creeping into like how I manage businesses and cash flow and everything. Is that something that you see happen to people a lot that like start studying it? Like they see it, the translation into, for example, like, I've heard you talk about it before, but building wealth versus destroying capital. Maybe that's a good thing to kind of like expand upon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I think that there's a number of different levels to it. One is that knowing Austrian economics does not make you a great business person, and there are lots of great business people who don't know anything about Austrian economics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, there's that aspect of it. I do think though that you know, perhaps it's because they are naturals at business, whereas other people don't have that natural talent, and so they need to develop it. And um, understanding and learning about Austrian economics might help them, have that tool to kind of be analyzing the world. Um, but also that in the sense that really great business people do care about financial statements. Um, and that if Austrian economics can take somebody who is skeptical of financial statements, right? There are business people who are like, I don't think financial statements matter all that much. Other things matter, like knowing your customer, for example. Um, Perhaps if they start reading about Austrian economics, they could be disabused of that notion, right? And then see the value of financial statements,
Mm-hmm.
and that would turn them around on that. Um, but yeah, I think that obviously with my accounting background, I do think financial statements are important. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of my career trajectory, I actually left the world of accounting, got into software development, and then got into like product management. And so I think that business is really it's and this is something Austrians emphasize, it's very complex. The entrepreneurship aspect of it, because pulling together labor, capital, and the market and customers, it sounds easy on paper, and I think that like Marxists want it to be easier. Of like, oh, you're just a capitalist and you just get this passive income. But anybody who's actually run a business knows that it's extremely difficult. Everyone
It's
in the business,
exhausting.
yeah, going in their own directions, and you've got to constantly stay on top of things in order for anything to happen, much less to make a profit, right? Like even making a loss and holding a business together is hard, but making a profit and holding a business together is even more difficult. And so entrepreneurial error abounds, and entrepreneurial success is extremely difficult to come by, even if you know everything about business. Or if there's like if you look at the history of entrepreneurship, there's so many entrepreneurs who might have had one successful business, and then they bankrupt themselves on their second business, right? That it just doesn't turn out well. So and same thing with like inheritances, right? You'll hear people say, oh, this person born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and then they became successful, and so obviously capitalism is inherited or whatever. They completely ignore all the trust fund babies who like try to start a business and blow all
Absolutely
their
tank.
capital. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It kind of makes me think of my wife. Well, okay, I was gonna put it all on her, but um but I like Downton Abbey too. We both watched Downton Abbey. Um, and I don't know if you ever watched that show, but Lord Grantham, like, inherited the estate and was going to pass it on, but he like managed it terribly, and it was like losing money and not adapting with the times and everything. I think, and I always thought that that was a really good analogy for like what it's like to manage wealth, because you're like, well, like, things aren't, what worked for the prior generation isn't going to work for this one. What worked before isn't going to work. um and and you're right, it's exhausting, trying to generate wealth. And so, what do you think the problems are? What do you think leads to people destroying capital in business?
Yeah, well, first of all, capital destruction is kind of the default, right? That
Yeah.
if you don't do anything, as you mentioned, that it depreciates, right? Just if you just look at depreciation of, if you leave a car on your driveway, like its natural state is that it loses value. Um, and that it takes, even for something as simple as a car, it takes constant maintenance to even like try to minimize the value loss. Um, so I think that there's that, and then there's all sorts of human cognitive biases of, hey, this worked in the past, why isn't it working now? The ego, the pride of like, not wanting to change because, hey, the problem isn't me, the problem is the customer, or
Yeah.
try to blame others. It's this new generation of employees are too lazy or something. So I think that all of the human weaknesses are go on display in that regard. But also that the the government is constantly siphoning value away from people, and so whether it's through property taxes, income tax, or inflation, you constantly are being eaten away by what I would characterize as parasites. And so that makes it all the much harder to stay and to build wealth, to preserve capital even.
Yeah. I thought about this recently, where it's like everywhere you look, it's like you're standing in the middle of a circle with a bunch of boxers, and they're just punching you, and then you like go, like that momentum takes you to the next punch, because it's like they tax the food, or not, I mean, not like basic goods, but like they tax, and there's different ways they hide the taxes, but it's like they tax things you buy, then they tax your income, they tax your real estate, they tax, like, it's just everywhere you go. And then it's like, and on top of that, they print the money, and that's another tax, like there's a the inflation tax.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, the money printing, not only is it an inflation tax on the cash that you would hold in your business, it actually that tax then gets transferred to other businesses. And so this is the Cantillon effect, right? So the reason, or if we look at where does the printed money go, it goes to big business and big banks first. And so whether it's in the form of new loans through the banking system, or QE, pumping up financial asset prices, that means that large businesses have a lower cost of capital than small businesses through this process of the Cantillon effect of money printing. And that's a double whammy. So now, as a small business, not only is your cash being taxed by inflation, but your competitors now, your biggest competitors, are getting a lower cost of capital and are able to grow more quickly than you are, because they are being subsidized through the financial system.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, like owning businesses, and you see these like opportunities where, like, God, if I was just a little bit bigger, I'd be able to get like some easier loans, and it's frustrating, because I'm like, if I had those, I feel like I know how I'd grow it properly. But yeah, the money flows differently, depending on your size, depending on who you are. And, you know, God forbid now, if you speak up politically, maybe you don't, uh,
Yeah, And speaking up, but also just being in the wrong industry. So we've seen, for example, fights over whether banks can finance oil and gas and coal, right? So because of these quote unquote ESG regulations, now not only is the financial system rigged in the sense of the Cantillon effect of money printing, but also just pure political power of, is your industry popular right now or is it unpopular? That's going to determine your cost of capital. Um, Unprecedented in at least in the United States. It does have precedent in communist China and in communist Soviet Union. But we used to pride ourselves in not doing that. And that's what caused the U.S. to become, the leading superpower and the most economically advanced and technologically advanced nation. But that seems to have changed over the past 10 years. It has significantly accelerated this
Yeah.
ESG activism in corporate America.
Do you think that's from the World Economic Forum types that are trying to push something into basically push communism into America?
So I think that they are one prong of this. The other prong is that because of we're coming back to inflation. Because of
Mm-hmm.
inflation, people can't hold money, right? So if you work with a financial planner, they'll say, hey, okay, you've got big goals in the future, right? You want to send your kids to college, or you're saving up for a down payment, or you want to retire. So because of inflation, you can't hold cash. You have to go invest that money. And the easiest, lowest cost way of investing that money is to put it into an index fund, right? And so what we've seen over the past several decades is the rise of passive investing, where people just every month they dollar cost average into an index fund, and these index funds now have become huge. So any given Fortune 500 company is majority owned by these index funds. And the people who are invested in these index funds, they don't care about corporate governance, right? All they care about is not losing money to inflation. And so they're not sophisticated value investors who are saying, hey, the reason I'm buying these shares is because I think they're undervalued. Not at all. They don't care if
They
they're
don't even care
overvalued
about that.
or undervalued. Yeah, they're just using it as a vehicle to protect their wealth from inflation. And it's caused tremendous concentration of power in these companies that run the index funds. So
Mm.
Vanguard, BlackRock, etc. And then these companies are, first of all, they're hiring college graduates from the best colleges, right? The best universities. And what the best universities, what has happened to them is that they've been captured by Marxists. And so you have the brightest minds in this country being indoctrinated into Marxism, which is it's an ideology that, just, as far as I'm concerned, been proven false repeatedly, but continues to survive in academia due to, we could get into that, but
They don't even have to
then
produce anything.
yeah, exactly. They and student loans and all of this stuff. And so these these index fund companies, not only are they kind of hiring little Marxists, but they are also under pressure from politicians, right? Of politicians saying, "Hey, look, we would love for our retirement system, right, our public pensions to invest with you, but you have to be politically activist, across your business." And so here are a list of mandates around, so you've got the diversity, equity, inclusion part of it. You've got the environmentalism part of it, and all the rest. And so I think that's and then the WEF, the WEF, like I kind of see them as they're a great punching bag, uh, but they're to me it's just like one of many bad actors in the system that is pushing in this direction. I don't think that they're the central coordinating mechanism of it. I actually think that it's kind of insidious in the sense that it's decentralized because it's all just part of this inflationary statist system where there is no central coordinating factor. If there was, it would be great because then we could just take them out, right? And I mean, in a
Hmm.
nonviolent way, in vote them out or whatever, or lobby against them. But it's actually a decentralized cancer, um, and if we were to point to one central thing, it's the money, right? And that's why Bitcoiners always say, fix the money, fix the world. Is that if you take away their ability to print money, then that's what's keeping this whole cancer alive. And if you take that away, then you starve it, right? And that if so that's why I'm singularly focused on Bitcoin rather than political activism or anything else like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think like I told you, my streaming platform is freedom of speech focused. Um, but that's just like a small part of the battle. Because really, if you fix the money and like you said, basically like a cancer, like where they, I like that you use that analogy because it's like if you starve what's feeding it, then you can get rid of it. And it's kind of difficult at this point because it's not like, oh, you just have like cancer in this one organ and it's something that we can like cut out and get rid of. Like, no, you kind of have to eradicate the entire body at this point because this money printing has infected everything, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, and I think that the the like the culture war aspect of it is um, doomed to failure because you're fighting a battle on all fronts that is being financed by an adversary who has infinite resources, right? That they can just print as much money as they want.
Yeah.
Now, we do see that there are limits to how much money they can print, right? And they've run into that over the past year of like, oh, actually, this is causing inflation. And um, you know, one Bitcoin aside, the other argument it would be that because their ideology is fundamentally flawed, that eventually it does collapse. And so, that's what we saw with the Soviet Union. Eventually, its internal contradictions cause it to collapse. But that causes lots of human misery for those intervening decades where
Hmm.
the ideology is able to prop itself up. And so, with what's going on with energy prices, for example, we're starting to see people say, hey, look, we need to reopen coal-fired power plants in Europe because otherwise we're going to freeze to death in the winter. And so that's where you start seeing the system itself collapsing just due on its own without Bitcoin at all. But I find that to be kind of the doomsday scenario of well, we don't want that. We want the hopeful outcome of Bitcoin actually curing the disease rather than the disease killing the victim.
Yeah, yeah, it'd be much better than like the victim dying and then we do an autopsy on them and go, okay, this is what went wrong.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that as humans that we would be able to like be like, okay, well, the problem was this monetary inflation, and so now we're going to create a fiat system where we don't create more fiat. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't seem like the outcome in that scenario anyway. Without
And no, and the people that can create the fiat, they don't want to give that up.
no, and we already like I've seen tweets about like people who were promoting COVID lockdowns and restrictions and all of this saying, hey, let's or even the vaccine requirements. They'll say like, hey, let's not be stuck in the past. Like, let's not point fingers at who is responsible. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're just not gonna make any progress here because you're deciding that you're not gonna hold anyone accountable. There's no one gonna be held responsible. Like there should be Nuremberg trials, right? So
Yeah.
the I think that they're already going this direction of let's not look at the past. Let's just move forward, which means that nothing's gonna change.
Nothing's gonna get fixed. Um, Yeah, that's interesting. So then what do you think about like, because basically a lot of people have the theory that Bitcoin is this vacuum that's sucking the, world's wealth into it over a period of time. Um, and I on a podcast yesterday with, I think Phil Gibson, and him and Luke do co-host a weekly show with me, and then um, uh, we were talking about like the future system, and I was like, it totally makes sense to me now that like Bitcoin mining will just completely. I always was like, oh, Bitcoin mining will be like a settlement layer, but like the fact that this, and I haven't even looked into this Fed Mini or whatever it is, the stable coins on top of Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff. But like um, the Cleveland Fed, talking about how you can build on top of Bitcoin, a stable coin and stuff like that. It's very interesting. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I wonder if people are starting to see that, like, hey, we pay a lot of money for this settlement system already that's like in existence now. What if we just replace that with Bitcoin mining, and those fees are what, it'll be cheaper and more efficient. Do you see that as being like something that's going to happen? And if so, how are the money printers going to try and control that? Because in a perfect world, the Fed adopts Bitcoin, but I don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah, so I am very skeptical that they're going to be able to continue having the dollar, right? So I think that I'm very bearish on stable coins and on kind of that line of thought, because at the end of the day, they're no better than their incentives, and their incentives are always to print more dollars. And so in that context, really, the as more people understand Bitcoin, they will hold less in other assets, including dollar denominated bonds and all of this. And they will hold more Bitcoin. And so it's a slow process of education, right? Where people have to understand, okay, why is it that I have tremendous peace of mind holding Bitcoin? And, it's the most Zen asset, because from the outside, it's like, hey, Bitcoin's hyper volatile. There's no way that, I would want to hold it because it would be too stressful. Because then on the flip side is when you look at the fundamentals of, yeah, but hey, look, I put my Bitcoin on a multi-sig and I don't have to think about it for decades, because nobody can take it. And so I think that once we, well, as more and more people cross that bridge, that means that the dollar is going to collapse. And so I don't see any value in trying to bring the dollar like as a layer on top of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll try, but they
Oh
won't.
yeah, absolutely. And we've seen obviously like there's lots of people who use tethers on Tron today. And the reason I think that they use tethers like a stable coin on top of Tron, which is this like nonsense blockchain, is because the settlement assurances of the base layer don't actually matter for a stable coin, because the stable coin is centralized anyway. And so if the base layer screws up, the tethers company that banks tethers, right, that has the dollars in the bank account, they can fix the ledger. They could be using a SQL database and it wouldn't really matter. They're just using Tron because it's essentially a system where tethers can foist their negative externality onto it. It's like, oh, this person is going to let us use their database for free. Why wouldn't we abuse that, right? Like, why wouldn't we just put all of this data on there, um, and not have to maintain our own SQL database? And then you get the interoperability and like all of this, but fundamentally, there's not an argument to be made that we need to have stable coins be irreversible, right? Because stable coins will never be irreversible. Either you have a centralized issuer like Tethers that can always reverse a stablecoin transfer, or you have a decentralized stablecoin like Terra that implodes, and goes to zero on its own. And so, like, I don't think. Then people will say, "Oh, what about MakerDAO?" If you look at MakerDAO, MakerDAO is backed by USDC. USDC is a centralized stablecoin. So the decentralized stablecoins that continue to exist are backed by centralized stablecoins. And so it's like, all right, well, if USDC were to decide to change something, right, and reverse a USDC transaction into MakerDAO, then there's nothing that MakerDAO could do about that. All right. So I think stablecoins are really no different than fiat from an economic perspective. They're only different from fiat from kind of a product user experience perspective. In the same way that a wire transfer is different from ACH is different from a debit card, right? Like I see those, like, that's the difference. It's like, okay, you can use Tron or Visa. They're like
Same thing.
that's fine, yeah, but it's not like the difference between using BTC and USD, right? Like that's a different category difference.
Yeah, completely different. And I strongly encourage people, I mean, we are sponsored by the BitBox02 hardware wallet. So you can, store all your Bitcoin on their Bitcoin only hardware wallet. But I've been beating the drum with that. Like, it's like, yeah, it's a sponsor, but I'm like, everybody, you've got to get your keys off the exchange, because, we've seen what's happened, but it's also empowering whenever you're like, like, that can never be messed with. You have your hardware wallet there and you're like, that's cool. Like, and you just put it in a safe and you're like, that's amazing. Like,
Absolutely. And we're still only scratching the surface on what is possible with self-custody and hardware wallets. And so, like, something I'm looking at very closely is that there's a project within Bitcoin Core where you'll be able to, thanks to Taproot, be able to do something like have a 5 of 5 multi-sig, and then it becomes, after a month, 4 of 4 of multi-sig, and then after however many days or months, a 3 of 3 multi-sig. And so what that allows you to do is have a level of security where you don't have to, like, if you lose one of your hardware wallets, you just have to wait another month and then you'll be able to access your Bitcoin. And that also, like, in my mind, this is like the perfect multi-sig setup, where you're combining the elements of spreading out your keys in space, and then having the redundancy in time. Because obviously somebody who's trying to steal your Bitcoin, time works against them, right? Like, time is the enemy of crime. Because time means that the police are after you, and you can't, like, kidnap somebody for months on end. The logistics of it become unworkable. And so that's something that is only becoming possible thanks to Taproot activating last year. And so I think that, like, Bitcoin self-custody is not, like, we haven't reached its final form yet. It's still evolving. And that means that it goes back to what I was saying about, like, people understanding Bitcoin as this asset that provides tremendous peace of mind, that you can acquire it once, and then that nobody can take it away from you. That, like, we're still working towards that. Like, we haven't, it's already better than any other asset, right? It's already does that better than gold does, and better than real estate or stocks and bonds. But in the future, it will continue to improve. And that gap widening, I think that is going to accelerate adoption in the near future, of people realizing, as products and companies get built around that. Like, right now, we only have 2 companies building around that. We've got Casa and Unchained, right, that are, like, really at the forefront of multi-sig and collaborative custody. I think they're doing a great job. I think they're going to continue to improve. I also think that there's going to be new competitors that enter the market, and the market's going to grow. And so there's going to be like better products, but there's also people learning the hard way. So people learned the hard way with like Celsius and BlockFi and any other centralized platform, um, and even going back to like Mt. Gox, right, where people learn the not your keys, not your Bitcoin lesson the hard way. Ideally, they learn it by observing others getting wrecked, so that they don't lose their coins and they withdraw in time. But I think that humans are susceptible to greed, right? And so there's going to continue to be hard lessons. But the combination of great new products coming out, along with people getting wrecked, I think that that's going to drive the realization that, hey, Bitcoin's advantage is not just NGU, the price going up. It's also the fundamentals of how you hold it is just superior to any other asset.
Completely agree. And that's why I recommend everybody go to shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin made simple. Use the promo code Bitcoin made simple to get 5% off. How's that? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That'll make the sponsor happy. But yeah, no, it's so fundamental, and I think everybody should do it. I want to ask you before we run out of time about the Nakamoto Institute, because first of all, if anybody doesn't know, it's a great place to go and be able to like read what Satoshi said, which I think is so important. But since you obviously pay attention to what Satoshi said a lot, being part of the Nakamoto Institute, which it's nakamotoinstitute.org, right?
Yep.
Okay. Speak a little bit about Satoshi's master level understanding of so many things, because I like when I think it was Preston Pish when I talked to him, and I said, do you think it's one person or a group? And he just said he was like, the amount of fields of study that were a mastery level understanding is kind of mind boggling for one person. So what are your thoughts on that, since you've really studied Satoshi a lot?
Yeah. I find it to be a really interesting question of basically Satoshi. Here's kind of my current thesis in terms of Satoshi's genius is that his software engineering approach stumbled onto great economics. And so because he had, for example, the halvings, Bitcoin's halvings are a result of this in computer science is bitwise operator, like a right shift on binary, which is like I don't think that he was like, okay, I want this monetary policy, and so let me figure out how to write the code for that monetary policy. I think that he wrote the code for the monetary policy thinking of like, okay, what's the simplest way to write this? And then that turned out to be a really great monetary policy. Now, there's people who argue that like having the halvings every 4 years is bad, right? It's like so disruptive to the mining process that it makes it hard for miners, and it also opens it up to issues with transaction finality. Now that's a whole other can of worms that we can get into, but I think that a lot of what we see as like, oh, this is great economics might be the result of, first and foremost, trying to keep the software engineering very simple, and that he was trying to minimize the complexity of the software, and that leads to minimizing the uncertainty of the economic incentives in the system. Now, that's not to downplay his genius at all. I mean, I think that his biggest genius was really around the difficulty adjustment of every 2 weeks worth of blocks. Let's look at how quickly blocks are coming in, and let's update the mining difficulty of proof of work. I think that his central contribution to computer science and to human knowledge. So it's like Satoshi's invention. He didn't invent proof of work, right? Proof of work existed before Satoshi came along and published his white paper. But what he did invent is combining the proof of work with the difficulty adjustment in order to have this self-regulating decentralized clock for the Bitcoin ledger. And then, like, I think that he got so much right, even on things like outputs, right? So he, modeled the system to have this UTXO set as the ledger, which then you have like the altcoiners that came along with like Ethereum and said, hey, let's have an account based model, which turns out to be like much worse than the output model. And so it's there's lots of people who have tried to make changes to Satoshi's invention in order to improve it, and only later do they realize that actually Satoshi was right, and that we don't know if Satoshi was right because he foresaw the problems with the other ways of doing things, or if he kind of got lucky on like his first try. And it kind of like it gets into this question of like sometimes in software, like the first thing you try is actually what your intuition is telling you to do turns out to be right, because human intuition is actually not so bad. It's not as bad as we make it out to be.
Yeah, it's kind of like I mean, I'm not a developer or anything like that, but in through business have put together and developed multiple websites and stuff like that. And I find that like you, especially early on, you can get into like building something and you write so much unnecessary stuff that makes the whole code and everything so much more complex than it even needs to be. And you're like, wait a minute, what was I actually trying to do? Like, oh, it was much okay. Like, why didn't I just do like one point A to point B to point C? All right, there we go.
And Satoshi was actually not completely immune to that, because he had, for example, the additional ideas in the initial Bitcoin code base, like let's have a decentralized marketplace, let's have decentralized poker, let's have what we call today the Lightning Network. So like he threw a bunch of ideas in there as well and kind of started like coding them up. But I think that he had the wisdom of realizing that the central innovation here is not these other ancillary applications on the side. It really is the money. And he also, outside of the code, he did have an understanding that of sound money, for example, of saying, hey, look, the problem with central banks is that you have to trust them not to print a bunch of money. And so it's not like he had no understanding of monetary economics, and so he just, it was pure luck. He clearly was someone who was, a Renaissance man of knew the code, knew the economics, and put it all together in a really neat package where after launching Bitcoin, there's very few things that have had to be fixed in Bitcoin. Yeah, there are absolutely things that did have to be fixed, right? But it's not like it's we got this rough stone that had to be really polished into a diamond afterwards. Like, by and large, it worked. And I've read that the node software from people have run node software to today that dates back to like 2011. And so clearly, there have been improvements to the software, but not so much that it would be incompatible and that you would have to like upgrade your software.
Yeah, I even Phil had John Carvalho on the network, and I remember John saying it was all around that BIP that was everybody was talking about a month or two ago, and he said you don't have to upgrade your software. He's like, my Bitcoin nodes don't run Taproot. He's like, because I didn't upgrade them. They still work. And I think that's fascinating. Okay, so last couple thoughts then. Who, and I hate this question, but run the Nakamoto Institute. So I gotta ask you, who do you think is the most likely candidate to be Satoshi?
Yeah, I I've read about kind of all the candidates that have been written about. I haven't found any of them to be particularly compelling and like persuasive and standing out as um being Satoshi. So I don't have a favorite. I don't think that any of the names that have been floated around are him. And so I think it's still very much an open question. I think that it's even harder. Like, I think, is Satoshi still alive?
Hmm.
I, I have to wonder about that because I don't think that humans, um, like, if you have this bell curve of human behavior, Satoshi's behavior, if he's still alive, is like outlandish on this bell curve of
Hmm.
somebody who um does does not feel any need to come out and announce themselves as the inventor of Bitcoin. It's truly bizarre human behavior. If so, I don't know that he's even still alive. I yeah, I think that he's one of the most intriguing characters in human history, right? Second only to Jesus.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what are your thoughts on? So he referred to the blockchain as time chain, and I bring that up because I want to get your thoughts, and then I have a fun Satoshi theory. Um, but yeah, why do you think he called it a time chain?
Yeah, I think that he called it a time chain because it really is descriptive of what his invention was, which is a decentralized clock. And that this concept of a blockchain, like blockchains existed before Bitcoin, and any kind of software development process involves version control systems like Git that are very much in the same vein as blockchains of using hashes and rolling them up into kind of a canonical, thread or chain. So time chain makes a lot more sense and really, yeah, gets at why is Bitcoin new? And what I find to be troubling is kind of this emphasis on proof of work versus proof of stake, where in my mind, it's like, well, talking about Bitcoin being proof of work, I think is misleading in the sense that it's not like it's just proof of work, it's proof of work plus difficulty adjustment equals time chain. And so, like, in my mind, like Bitcoin is time chain. And so then these other systems that are like proof of stake, it's like, well, it's not proof of stake. There are no pure proof of stake systems, just like Bitcoin is not a pure proof of work system, right? It's a proof of work plus difficulty adjustment. What proof of stake is proof of stake plus developers, right? It's that you have to have this checkpointing. You have to have, or it's proof of stake plus nodes, or what we might call super nodes, right? Of these privileged attestation providers, or proof of authority is really what it is. And so, proof of stake plus proof of authority equals, I don't know, trust chain, right? That's what we should call
Hmm.
them. And so Bitcoin is really the only time chain, and all of these other things are trust chains. Is the what I think the language should be.
That's a really good analogy and a great like. I think we should change it to trust chain for any proof of stake. Um, so I'll give you my fun theory, and I hate to go to like this really dumb thought after having that really good thought, but I want to kind of wrap it up here because I don't want to take too much of your time. But so I had this theory that because I'm a filmmaker, so it just comes to me naturally to like think of the most fantastical idea. Um, And this is like a movie idea that probably Movies Plus will eventually have as an original eventually. Um, but I thought, I was like, what if Satoshi's from the future? Which, is not, people have theorized, oh, it's from the future. But I was like, it actually does make sense in the sense that like I don't think physically it's possible to travel to the past, but what if it's possible through code to communicate to the past? And so, let's just say hypothetically in the future, there's this world where that's invented, and there's somebody that's like, oh my God, this is going to ruin the entire world if people are able to talk to the past and change events. And then they realized, wait a minute, what if I create a monetary system that is a time chain that will, by the time, if I set it back in the past far enough, by the time it gets to present day when this time travel's invented, they can't mess with it because it'll completely, like, it would destroy the financial system because everything's built on Bitcoin. Like every single thing in our life runs on Bitcoin, in the year 2300 or something like that. So I was like, that is fascinating to me, the time chain aspect. So that was my fun theory of, okay, maybe he's from the future and he sent this message to the past and he picked, hey, right after the financial crisis of 2008, that's 12 years before COVID. Oh, this is kind of perfect timing for everything. Um, so that's my fun theory. Do you have a fun theory that's kind of like your movie theory of who Satoshi is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say that I do think that that God can intervene in the real world, right? And so I do think that it would not be impossible for God to introduce electrons into what we call the internet, into this network of computers, and introduce um, uh, um, a character, a pseudonym into the internet without there actually being any kind of human behind the keyboard. And so that would be my outlandish theory for Satoshi, is that um, God saw that there's a huge problem with fiat. That is that humans have figured out how to make fiat sustainable enough to where it doesn't just automatically collapse like it did, with past paper systems, and that it was causing tremendous damage to, the souls of people, and that it was actually, leading his experiment in a direction that was, spiraling out of control. Into the hands of the devil, and that he saw it fit to intervene in a way that is very nuanced, right? That he did not want it to be understood as divine intervention, but he also didn't want it to have perfect clarity of like, this is humans doing it. And so much in the way that he often acts is that he wanted it to be very mysterious, to give us the most free will possible, and he so that's and also to as we started at the beginning of the episode, like Bitcoin's price volatility like creates humility, right? So he also wanted it to bring out virtues in humans, not just the negatives of like the greed, right? And so that's yeah, it's still a view that I'm developing, but I do think that Bitcoin is so important to God's plan that I wouldn't put it out of question that like Satoshi Nakamoto is something very different from what kind of the secular assumptions would be about who he is.
Yeah, I love that theory, and I agree with you a lot. Because it could either be divinely inspired in someone, or but like you know, it's not impossible. People are like, well, it's electronic. Like, well, I mean, there's like electricity in our brain. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. And my theological view is that God creates the world every moment, and that he can add and subtract as he wishes, and that adding some electrons is he added a burning bush at one point. He added the resurrection of Jesus at one point, and so there's not anything stopping him from adding Satoshi Nakamoto into a database on the internet.
yeah, exactly. I mean, if you've ever studied the Shroud of Turin, like I don't know if you ever like read about that, but they said like the light that would leave that impression of Jesus's face like is like the power of the sun. Like that's how much power required to leave a photo negative that's like so deeply ingrained. So yeah, the idea that it couldn't be through computers is a little ridiculous. Well, I'd love to keep pulling on that thread, but maybe I'll have you back on and we'll just do a whole episode that's like theology and Bitcoin or something. Closing thought, I wanted to ask you, you know, bull market versus bear market, which do you prefer? And for those of us that are going through our first bear market, what's a pointer for surviving? What's the best way to get through it?
Yeah, I think they both have their charms. I think that I mean I have to prefer a bull market, right? I think that all else equal, a bull market indicates that in the clearest possible terms that we're making progress of adoption and wider distribution of Bitcoin, and the ultimate success of Bitcoin. Um, but that's not to say that bear markets are a time for complete and utter despair. I think that the way to get through a bear market is one, be have that recurring buy, DCA. It's hard to like force yourself to buy, like or to even think to buy. It's like the market reminds you to buy during the bull market because you feel like this FOMO of like, oh, I'm gonna get instant gratification from buying because it's gonna go up 10% tomorrow. Whereas in the bear market, you're incentivized to procrastinate and be like, well, it's gonna go down some more, so I shouldn't buy, right? And that becomes to your detriment when the market is actually bottoming, and that no, it's not going to. So I think setting up a recurring buy is a great way to kind of hack your way into being an accumulator at any price during the bear market, so that you don't accidentally wait too long. Um, and then I think that you know in a bear market, it's very easy to um, lose interest in Bitcoin. And that's what happened to me in my first bear market in like 2015, 2016. I got really interested in quadcopters and computer vision and things like that. And, obviously those are perfectly fine hobbies to have. But then when the bull market came around, I thought to myself, you know what? It would have been better if I'd stayed focused on Bitcoin and like learned more about Bitcoin and created more Bitcoin content. And so I think that after that, my mindset then in the 2018 bear market was like always bet more on Bitcoin from not just a financial perspective, but also in terms of the time spent, on it. And so I think that it's just a great investment of time to be learning more about Bitcoin, building on top of Bitcoin. Yeah, that'd be my advice.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Pierre, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And tell people where the best places to find you because um, you have a new Twitter handle. So that might.
Yeah, at Bitcoin Pierre. Bitcoin, everyone knows how to spell Bitcoin, then Pierre, Pierre, on Twitter. And my DMs are open, so if anyone wants to shoot me a question or a comment, always happy to chat with people.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on, Pierre.
Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks again to Pierre for coming on, and thanks again to Shift Crypto in the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. It is the Bitcoin only hardware wallet, and you can get one at shiftcrypto.ch/Bitcoin made simple. Promo code Bitcoin made simple to get 5% off. I'll talk to you guys next week. See ya.